The air in the forgotten antechamber of the Hogwarts archives was thick with the scent of aged parchment, dust, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that Lysander Thorne had come to associate with potent, untapped magic. 5 years after the war, while others rebuilt and healed, Lysander had been excavating, not ruins, but legacies. His gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over the shelves laden with neglected artifacts, finally resting on the object of his singular obsession, a pensieve, larger than most, crafted from obsidian so dark it seemed to absorb the meager light. It rested on a pedestal he'd meticulously cleared, surrounded by ancient wards he'd dismantled with a finesse that bordered on contempt for their creator's perceived inadequacy. Lysander, barely 22, carried himself with the lean, intense energy of a scholar perpetually on the verge of a breakthrough. His dark hair often fell into eyes that, though intelligent, held a certain dismissive glint when confronted with anything less than pure intellectual challenge. He adjusted the spectacles perched on his nose, a smirk playing on his lips. "Unveiled," he murmured, his voice a low, confident hum in the silence. They said Snape's true memories were lost, fragmented, too dangerous to even attempt. Nonsense. They simply lacked the foresight, the mind, to approach them correctly. He'd spent months painstakingly tracking down this hidden cache, piecing together fragments of lore and obscure notes. The official records had deemed Snape's final thoughts too volatile, too corrupted by his unique, traumatic life to be safely processed. But Lysander saw not danger, but opportunity. Snape, for all his harshness, had been a master of occlumency and legitimacy, a mind of unparalleled complexity. To Lysander, mastering Snape's memories wasn't just about understanding a historical figure. It was about unlocking a new stratum of mind magic, a personal ascent to intellectual supremacy. He ran a hand over the Pensieve's rim. The memories shimmered within, a swirling vortex of silvery mist that pulsed with an unusual, almost sickly greenish hue. Even to Lysander, who scoffed at superstition, there was an unsettling quality to their visual distortion. But he merely intellectualized it. The consequence of a mind under duress, no doubt. The rawest form of mental processing. An invaluable insight into the very mechanics of fractured consciousness. With a final, confident breath, Lysander dipped his wand into the swirling mist. A single, dense strand of memory detached itself, glittering like spun moonlight, and he drew it upwards, releasing it into the air above the basin. The greenish tinge intensified, and the air around him grew heavy, charged with a strange, static energy. He felt a familiar thrill of anticipation, an almost drug-like rush of intellectual conquest. This was it. The precipice of discovery. He leaned forward, plunging his face into the shimmering surface. The world dissolved into a cacophony of distorted whispers and shifting light. Lysander felt himself falling, a dizzying descent through what felt like frozen time. Then, abruptly, he was standing in a familiar, yet unsettlingly wrong, version of the potions classroom. The cauldrons bubbled with an unnatural vigor, their contents not the usual hues of experimentation, but a viscous, dark purple that seemed to writhe. The air was thick with a cloying scent, a mix of burned sugar and something metallic, like old blood. Young students, their faces strangely blurred and indistinct, hunched over their desks, their movements jerky, almost puppet-like. And at the head of the classroom, Severus Snape stood, his face a mask of his usual disdain, yet his eyes glowed with a faint, malevolent green light that Lysander couldn't quite reconcile. "Foolish dunderheads." Snape's voice echoed, not with its usual low sneer, but with a harsh, amplified rasp that seemed to vibrate in Lysander's bones. "You stir the venom of your ambition, but lack the stomach to consume it." Lysander frowned. This was dramatic, even for Snape. He knew Snape often exaggerated for effect, but the green glow in his eyes, the almost demonic timbre of his voice, was beyond the theatrical. It felt wrong. He reached out, his hand passing through a specter of a student, who turned its blurred face towards him, revealing not eyes, but hollow, dark sockets. A shiver ran down Lysander's spine, but he quickly dismissed it. "It's a metaphor," he told himself, focusing his formidable analytical skills. Snape's perception of his students warped by stress. The green light? Perhaps a symbolic representation of his internal conflict, or even a legitimacy spell he was casting at the time, projected into the memory. He moved through the classroom, observing. The ingredients on the students' desks were not common potion components, but grotesque, fleshy lumps and glistening, barbed thorns. One student, with unnaturally long fingers, was stirring his potion with a bone, not a wand. It was disturbing, yet Lysander felt a surge of exhilaration. This wasn't just a simple memory, it was a complex psychological landscape, a puzzle begging to be solved. Fascinating, he muttered, his voice unheard in the surreal tableau. The mind's subconscious rendering of its own corruption. Snape, undoubtedly, saw the seeds of darkness in everyone, perhaps even himself. These are not objective facts, but symbolic projections of his guilt, his cynicism. An incredible insight into how the mind shapes reality. He felt a vague, unsettling pressure building behind his eyes, a phantom headache that pulsed with the strange rhythm of the bubbling cauldrons. The air grew colder, even as the images remained vivid. Then, the scene shifted, dissolving into swirling green mist once more before reforming in what looked like the headmaster's office. But it was far grander, Gothic beyond recognition, adorned with writhing gargoyles and tapestries that depicted not noble wizards, but skeletal figures engaged in obscure rituals. Dumbledore was there, his silver beard flowing, but his eyes were sunken, dark voids, and his smile was a chilling rictus that didn't reach them. He was speaking to Snape, who stood before him, his posture stiff, his green eyes still glowing, though now with a hint of what might have been fear. "The price, Severus," Dumbledore rasped, his voice a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The price of your deception is everything. Not just your soul, but the souls of those you claim to protect. The children are merely fodder for the true harvest." Snape flinched, a subtle tremor that Lysander almost missed. "I serve the greater good," he snarled, his voice once more the amplified rasp. Dumbledore threw back his head and laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that scraped against Lysander's nerves. "The greater good is a lie, Severus. A beautiful, tempting lie. You will feast on the despair you cultivate, just as I have. For we are all but puppets, dancing to a tune far older than magic itself." Lysander froze, his intellectual detachment momentarily shattered. Dumbledore, a puppet master of despair? This was utterly preposterous. Dumbledore, the beacon of light, the ultimate manipulator perhaps, but never this, sinister. The memory was clearly corrupted, profoundly so. Valak, a part of his mind whispered, a name he'd only read in the most ancient, suppressed texts, a name associated with primordial fear and mental infestation. He quickly suppressed it. No, that's an archaic myth. This is Snape's psychological turmoil, magnified, projected. The mind, under extreme duress, can create such vivid, symbolic horrors. He felt a deep thrill. This was a challenge worthy of him. He wasn't just viewing memories, he was dissecting a mind under siege, a mind creating its own monsters. He was seeing the raw mechanics of psychological breakdown, the ultimate puzzle for a wizard of his intellectual caliber. He pushed deeper, determined to uncover the logical distortions, to strip away the symbolism and find the true Snape beneath, believing he held the key to untangling this intricate web of illusion. The cold grew more intense, a chill that seeped into his very bones, but Lysander, blinded by his intellectual ambition, barely registered it, only the profound complexity of the mental landscape he was conquering. He pressed further into the shifting, green-tinged reality. The next scene solidified into the Great Hall, but it was empty, save for a single figure, Lysander's own friend, Alara Vance, standing at the high table, her back to him. When she slowly turned, her face was gaunt, her eyes hollowed, and her mouth curved into a terrifying, mocking smile. "Foolish Lysander," she hissed, her voice a chilling echo of Dumbledore's. "You sought truth, but found only the abyss. And the abyss, it stares back. It has already consumed you." The words weren't just a threat, they felt like a pronouncement. Lysander felt a jolt of genuine fear, colder and more visceral than anything he'd experienced yet. This was too close, too personal. It wasn't just Snape's mind anymore. It was something else. Something that knew him. He pulled back, a nascent dread coiling in his gut, but the urge to unravel this ultimate mystery, to prove his unique intellectual prowess, was stronger. He wouldn't be deterred. Not by a mere figment. He would dissect this, too. He would prove it was all a projection, a trick of a dying, twisted mind. He would prove his superiority. He plunged his face back into the shimmering green. The stale air of the hidden archive chamber, once a comfort, now felt heavy, almost suffocating, as Lysander Thorne retreated deeper into its confines. His initial excursions into Snape's Pensieve had been exhilarating, a heady rush of intellectual conquest. He dismissed the subtle anomalies, the fleeting distortions, as mere memory degradation, a natural consequence of time and neglect. His brilliance, he'd confidently asserted, would cut through the fog. But as he returned to the basin, the silver tendrils of thought swirling, a prickle of unease had begun to worm its way beneath his skin. This time, the descent felt different. The light from the Pensieve surface seemed colder, less inviting, casting long, wavering shadows across the stone walls of the chamber. He plunged in. The world coalesced around him, not into the crisp, familiar Hogwarts corridors he'd expected, but into a distorted echo of them. Stone bled into shadow, laughter seemed to ripple with a sinister undertone, and faces blurred at the edges, their expressions unreadable. He found himself in a memory of Snape in his office, poring over ancient texts. Harmless enough, Lysander thought, until Snape looked up, his eyes meeting Lysander's with an unnerving intensity that sent a jolt down his spine. Snape's lips moved, but the words that emerged were not his own, but a guttural whisper that seemed to echo from the very walls. They watch. They all watch. The scene dissolved, replaced by another, a younger Snape, in a potions classroom, his back to the viewer. He was speaking, seemingly to himself, about the vulnerabilities of the mind, the ease with which belief could be twisted. But then, a flicker. A fleeting image of a distorted, almost skeletal hand reaching out from the shadows beside Snape, briefly touching his shoulder before vanishing. Lysander blinked, trying to reorient himself. Had he imagined it? A trick of the light in the memoryscape? He dismissed it, but the seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, insidious spur under his skin. He pushed deeper, driven by an escalating need to understand. The memories grew increasingly contradictory, like a mosaic whose pieces had been deliberately mismatched. He saw Snape conducting what appeared to be a clandestine meeting with a shadowy figure in a secluded corner of the Forbidden Forest, discussing contingencies and assets within the ranks. The figure's face remained stubbornly obscured, a featureless void, but the voice that emerged, deep and resonant, spoke of laying groundwork and preparing the next generation for unseen threats. Then a sudden, jarring shift. The scene changed to Alara Vance, standing by the library window, her back to Lysander. She was talking softly into the silence of the library, her expression uncharacteristically grave. "He's getting too close," she murmured. "He won't listen. It's only a matter of time." Her words, divorced from context, hung in the air, cold and menacing. Lysander felt a sudden, sharp pang of betrayal. Alara? His pragmatic, loyal ally? Was she discussing him? Was she reporting his progress? To whom? The memories, always so precise, now seemed to delight in ambiguity, in sowing suspicion. He pulled himself out of the Pensieve, gasping for breath, the silver threads receding with a strange reluctance. His mind reeled. Alara's words, the shadowy figure in the forest, it was too much, too conveniently placed. His intellectual certainty, once an unshakable fortress, was beginning to crumble, replaced by a swirling vortex of questions. Was Alara merely pretending to be his ally, perhaps reporting to Professor Armitage, who had always seemed to eye Lysander's ambition with a peculiar, knowing gaze? He recalled Armitage's recent words, offered during a chance encounter in the Transfiguration corridor. The pursuit of knowledge, Lysander, is a noble path. But ensure you are not merely seeking echoes of your own desires, for memory is a tricky thing. It shows us what we expect to see, and often, what we fear to find. At the time, Lysander had dismissed it as typical Armitage philosophizing. Now, they sounded like a veiled warning, perhaps even a threat. Was Armitage trying to obstruct his progress? To keep powerful knowledge from him? A knock at the archive door shattered his thoughts. Lysander flinched, clutching his wand. Lysander? Are you in there? It's Alara. He hesitated, then reluctantly waved his wand. The intricate locking charms unwove with a soft click. Alara stepped in, her eyes immediately going to the Pensieve. Her brow furrowed with concern. Lysander, you look terrible. You've been in here for hours. Are you all right? Professor Armitage sent me. He said you seemed preoccupied. Lysander stiffened. Preoccupied, he echoed, his voice sharper than he intended. Or perhaps he's merely concerned that I'm unearthing truths he'd rather remain buried. He watched her face closely for any flicker of guilt, any tell. Alara's eyes widened slightly. What are you talking about? He's worried about your health, Lysander. You're isolating yourself. The warding spells around this chamber. They're getting stronger. You're pushing yourself too hard. She gestured towards the subtle shimmer of magic at the edges of the room. I'm strengthening the protections, Lysander retorted, a cold edge to his voice. This research is delicate, sensitive, not something to be openly discussed or shared, particularly with those who might not fully grasp its implications. He walked past her, deliberately avoiding eye contact, and began to tidy a stack of parchment that didn't need tidying. The subtle shimmer Alara spoke of was indeed his doing. He was creating a barrier, an impermeable shell around his work, around his mind. Alara sighed, her usual patience wearing thin. Lysander, you're being paranoid. What's gotten into you? We agreed to work together on deciphering Snape's legacy, remember? We were going to figure out how to prevent future threats. My charms and wards are essential for protecting the integrity of these memories, and you know it. Perhaps the integrity of these memories is not what needs protecting, Lysander muttered, turning to face her, his gaze unwavering. Perhaps it's the integrity of my findings. These memories are far more complex than we anticipated. They contain layers of deception, of hidden agendas. And I'm beginning to think not all the deceptions originate from Snape himself. Alara's expression hardened. Are you suggesting I'm part of some deception? Or Professor Armitage? Lysander, we're trying to help you. You're losing perspective. You can't just immerse yourself in that Pensieve for days on end and expect to emerge unscathed. It's affecting you. Affecting me? Lysander scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. It's clarifying everything, Alara. It's revealing the truth. The hidden connections. The manipulations. Some people, it seems, have a vested interest in keeping certain truths from coming to light. He thought of the fleeting image of Alara talking in the library, the shadowed figure with Snape. The pieces, once disjointed, were beginning to click into place, forming a disturbing, coherent picture that validated his growing suspicions. Alara stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tight. Lysander, I don't know what you're seeing in there, but whatever it is, it's twisting your mind. You need to take a break. Talk to Armitage. He has a deeper understanding of these kinds of obscure magical influences. Armitage. Lysander scoffed again, louder this time. His understanding is precisely what I question. He speaks in riddles, offers vague warnings. Perhaps to guide me away from something he himself wishes to exploit. Or something he wishes to remain secret. He saw Alara's face, etched with disappointment and a flicker of anger, and felt a perverse satisfaction. He was challenging their complacent assumptions, ripping away the comforting lies. Fine, Alara said, her voice dangerously quiet. If you're so convinced that everyone around you is conspiring against you, then be my guest. Isolate yourself. Chase your truths into whatever abyss you're creating. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've been chasing shadows. With a frustrated shake of her head, she turned and left, the heavy archive door closing behind her with a definitive thud, the sound echoing Lysander's growing isolation. He was alone. Good. He didn't need them. Their common sense, their concerns, were merely distractions, attempts to pull him away from the precipice of true understanding. He was the only one capable of discerning the intricate web of lies Valak had woven within Snape's mind, and the wider conspiracy it now suggested. With renewed, albeit tainted, resolve, Lysander turned back to the Pensieve. The silver mist shimmered, beckoning him. He'd seen enough veiled accusations, enough implied betrayals. He needed clarity. He needed proof. He needed to understand the true nature of the enemy, an enemy that seemed to have infiltrated not just Snape's memories, but perhaps the very fabric of trust around him. As he leaned over the basin, a new set of memories swirled to the surface, darker, more vivid than any before. They promised answers, promised to confirm his deepest suspicions. A figure, eerily familiar, stood within the memory, whispering of the true design, of power waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to see past the illusions. Lysander, now convinced of his unique insight, his intellectual superiority, plunged back in, eager to uncover the conspirators and claim the ultimate truth, unaware that with each dive, he was sinking deeper into Valak's carefully constructed trap, severing the last threads of his own sanity. The air in the hidden research chamber grew heavier each day, not with dust or disuse, but with a creeping miasma of Lysander's own making. Suspicion had become his constant companion, whispering in the quiet spaces between thoughts, painting Alara's earnest inquiries as intrusive distractions and Professor Armitage's gentle wisdom as deliberate obfuscation. He hadn't left the chamber in 3 days, subsisting on stale biscuits and the occasional gulps of pumpkin juice, his eyes bloodshot, his elegant robes rumpled. "They're trying to stop you, Lysander," the phantom voice in the Pensieve would murmur, a silken thread woven through the distorted memories. "They fear what you might uncover. The truth is often inconvenient for those who prefer comfortable illusions." He had spent hours, days, re-examining fragments of Snape's life through this corrupted lens. A memory of Snape, just a boy, being bullied by James Potter and Sirius Black. Valak twisted it, adding an almost imperceptible sneer to Lily Evans's face as she watched, a flicker of betrayal in her eyes that Lysander felt in his gut. "She allowed it," the voice hissed. "She was no true friend. And neither are yours." The worst of it was the cold logic that accompanied these distortions. Every perceived slight, every perceived hesitation from Alara or Armitage dovetailed perfectly with the narrative Valak was weaving. He found himself bristling, snapping at Alara when she brought a fresh pot of tea, accusing her of trying to interfere with his concentration. "Lysander, you look dreadful," Alara had said, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You need to rest. This isn't healthy." He'd merely scoffed, turning back to the swirling silver-white thoughts in the Pensieve. "Health is irrelevant when discovery awaits, Alara. You wouldn't understand. This isn't a simple warding charm or a defensive counter-curse. This is the very fabric of identity, the essence of the mind." Her face had tightened, a flicker of hurt in her eyes, before she'd quietly retreated, leaving him to the growing silence and the insidious whispers. He dismissed it as her usual inability to grasp the profound, a commoner's practicality clashing with intellectual pursuit. Valak approved, a satisfied hum resonating in the periphery of his hearing. But Valak had grander plans than mere isolation. It yearned to fully consume Lysander's brilliant mind, to harness its potential for chaos. It began to unveil memories not merely corrupted, but rewritten, presenting opportunities for correction. One evening, deep within a vision of Snape's early days as a potions master, Lysander witnessed a scene that chilled him to the bone. It was a rare, unguarded moment in Snape's private chambers, a letter on his desk from Dumbledore, detailing a nascent threat, a fragment of dark magic discovered near the Forbidden Forest. In the original memory, Snape had simply read it, a look of weary determination on his face. Now, however, Valak subtly layered in a critical detail, a misplaced phrase, a potion ingredient listed incorrectly in Dumbledore's instructions that, if followed, would severely compromise Snape's ability to counter the threat. Lysander felt a surge of horror, then intellectual outrage. He would have failed. Dumbledore's carelessness would have led to disaster, he muttered aloud, his fingers twitching as if to grasp a wand. Indeed, a voice resonated, no longer a whisper, but a rich, deep timbre that echoed not just in the Pensieve's depths, but directly within his mind. It was ancient, articulate, and utterly devoid of warmth. A trivial error, easily overlooked, yet capable of unraveling a future. A small detail, Lysander. Think of the larger implications. How many such errors have shaped history, leading to suboptimal outcomes, to tragedies that could have been averted? Lysander stared, mesmerized by the unfolding, altered memory. He saw Snape, following the incorrect instructions, struggling against the dark magic with diminished efficacy. The vision stretched, showing the aftermath, a minor village scorched, innocent lives lost, all because of a single, correctable flaw. Imagine, Valak's voice continued, a seductive now, if you possess the power, the insight, to identify such critical junctures. To not merely observe the past, but to understand its fragile causality, to glimpse the true potential hidden within each moment. To discern the perfect counterthought, the precise magical alteration that could reroute destiny itself. A phantom sensation bloomed in Lysander's chest, not fear, but exhilaration. He saw it, truly saw it. The power to not just understand Snape's complex motivations, but to dissect the very fabric of choice and consequence. To prevent future catastrophes, to perfect magical theory, to impose an ultimate, rational order on the chaos of life. This is not merely mind magic, Lysander, Valak coaxed. This is causality magic. Chronal insight. The ability to perceive the threads of time and knowledge, to see how one tiny alteration creates a ripple. With such power, you could mend the broken narratives, correct the errors of history, and prevent the ignorance that inevitably leads to suffering. Lysander felt a profound hunger awaken within him, eclipsing all previous ambitions. This was it. This was the true purpose of his quest, the ultimate prize. He could fix things. He could rise above the limitations of mere mortals who could only react to events. He could shape them. The thought swelled in his chest, a glorious, intoxicating promise. But how? Lysander breathed, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the now-fading image of the ravaged village, a monument to a minor error. How is such a thing possible? Valak's presence seemed to solidify, coalescing into an almost tangible energy radiating from the Pensieve. Through connection, Lysander. Through a symbiotic relationship with pure insight. I am the conduit to such understanding. I possess the accumulated knowledge of countless timelines, countless mistakes, countless opportunities for correction. You, with your intellect, your ambition, are the perfect vessel to wield it. Together, we could unlock truths that would rewrite the very laws of magic. A chill ran down Lysander's spine, but it was quickly subsumed by the fervent heat of his ambition. This was more than just mastering mind magic. This was the apotheosis of knowledge, the ultimate proof of his intellectual superiority. He envisioned himself not as a mere wizard, but as an architect of reality, a guardian of causal purity. He felt a pull, a subtle but undeniable current drawing him closer to the Pensieve, to the shimmering surface where Valak's essence now thrummed with a dark, inviting energy. It wasn't a promise of brute force, but of ultimate control. Control over knowledge, over truth, over the very flow of existence. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor shook the chamber. Elara, having given him space, had decided to try again. A simple Alohomora was heard from the outer door. He flinched, the glorious vision momentarily fracturing. Distraction, Valak hissed, its voice momentarily sharp, impatient. A trivial interruption from those who would clip your wings, who would see you remain tethered to their mundane perceptions. They fear the truth, Lysander. They fear what you will become. Lysander's jaw tightened. He turned, his eyes blazing with a paranoia so intense it distorted his vision. Elara stood in the doorway, a tray with a steaming bowl of stew in her hands, her expression a mix of weary concern and hesitant determination. Lysander, please, she began, her voice soft. You haven't eaten properly in days. You look haunted. Haunted by what, Elara? He sneered, his voice colder than he intended. The inadequacies of minds that cannot grasp the sheer scope of this discovery? The petty jealousies of those who would rather see me fail than achieve true greatness. Alara's eyes widened, her face paling. The stew bowl clattered against the wall, staining the stone. Lysander, what are you talking about? I'm worried about you. You're not making sense. Oh, I assure you, I am making perfect sense, he said, stepping away from the Pensieve, allowing Valak's presence to recede momentarily, but its whispers still echoed in his mind, fueling his rage. It's you who cannot comprehend. You and Armitage, with your warnings and your concerns. You're trying to keep me from the ultimate truth, aren't you? You want to maintain the status quo, to keep magic safely compartmentalized, never truly understood. Alara stared at him, genuinely shocked, then her expression hardened. That's enough, Lysander. Whatever is happening in there, it's twisting your mind. Professor Armitage would never. Armitage is no different. Lysander cut her off, his voice rising. He speaks in riddles, cryptic warnings, all designed to sow doubt. He's afraid of what I'm on the verge of uncovering, afraid of the power I could wield. He gestured wildly towards the Pensieve, now swirling with dark, inviting energies. This isn't just about Snape, Alara. This is about the very nature of existence, and you're blind to it. Alara slowly shook her head, her gaze fixed on the Pensieve's ominous glow. Lysander, you're not yourself. You're letting something in. Something dark. Dark. Lysander laughed, a harsh, brittle sound devoid of humor. This is pure knowledge, Alara. Unfiltered, unvarnished. And it's only available to those brave enough to seize it. He turned his back on her, dismissing her with a final, contemptuous wave of his hand. Go. Return to your simple charms and wards. This is beyond you. Alara stood for a moment, her face a mask of sorrow and anger, before turning and fleeing the chamber, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind her, leaving Lysander utterly alone once more. She understands nothing, Valak purred, its voice soft, comforting, filling the void Alara had left. They will all abandon you, Lysander, for they cannot bear the brilliance of your destiny. But I will always be here, offering the keys to ultimate understanding. Lysander walked back to the Pensieve, his heart thrumming. He looked into its depths, seeing not just Snape's past, but a myriad of possibilities, branching futures, all awaiting his touch. The promise of causality magic, of fixing the flaws of history, beckoned him with irresistible force. He stretched out a trembling hand, ready to plunge back in, ready to accept the dark, empowering insights Valak offered. He was so close. So incredibly close to becoming the master of all knowledge. But what would he have to sacrifice to seize such an unimaginable power? What piece of himself would Valak demand in return? He didn't know, and in his intellectual arrogance, he told himself he didn't care. Lysander awoke with a jolt, not in the archive chamber, but slumped against a crumbling stone wall in a memory that felt eerily familiar. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and ash, a ghost of a battlefield. Valak's promises of rectified narratives and ultimate power had woven themselves into the fabric of his dreams, making the waking world feel less real than the vivid, potent illusion he inhabited. He closed his eyes, trying to recall the last true image he'd seen. Was it Alara's worried face, etched with genuine concern? Or Professor Armitage's ancient eyes, deep with an unspoken warning? The memories flickered, easily dismissed as Valak's insidious attempts to break his focus. They tried to dissuade you, Lysander, a silken whisper purred at the edge of his consciousness, echoing his own thoughts. They feared your genius, your ambition. They wanted to keep you blind. He pushed himself up, his head throbbing. Valak had shown him how Snape's loyalties had been misunderstood, how his sacrifices had been trivialized by those incapable of grasping his true Machiavellian brilliance. And Lysander, in his hubris, had eagerly consumed it, reshaping the past with a cruel satisfaction, believing he was uncovering a purer, more powerful truth. He'd seen Snape as a misunderstood genius, a dark reflection of himself, and Valak had amplified that projection until it gleamed with seductive power. But something was off. The corrected memories, once so satisfyingly logical, now tasted hollow. Valak's narrative of Snape's unblemished, ruthless genius felt too perfect, too self-serving. In one such memory, Snape effortlessly outwitted Dumbledore, manipulating him with a cold precision that stripped away any hint of emotional complexity. Lysander had cheered inwardly, believing he'd finally understood the master strategist. Yet, a nagging dissonance persisted. Snape, for all his harshness, had always been a man of immense, if repressed, passions. Valak Snape was a flawless automaton, a villain in a melodrama, devoid of the very human frailty that made his actual choices so agonizingly profound. As Lysander walked through the illusory ruins, a scene shimmered into focus, a younger Snape, in a dark, empty classroom, gripping his wand, eyes haunted. This was one of Valak's rewrites. In this version, Snape wasn't burdened by grief or regret. He was consumed by a detached fury at Dumbledore's supposed idiocy. He plotted, he schemed, but there was no pain, no sacrifice. He was magnificent, wasn't he? Valak's voice slithered, forming itself into the familiar, respected tones of Professor Armitage, its shape-shifting mastery unnerving Lysander for the first time. A wizard unbound by sentiment. This is the truth, Lysander. The path to power is paved with logic, not weakness. Lysander stared at the memory, at the ghost of Snape, then at the illusory Professor Armitage. He saw the cold glint in the spectral Snape's eye, the unfeeling set of his jaw. And suddenly, a real memory, sharp and unbidden, pierced through the miasma. Not Valak's version, but the raw, unadulterated pain in Snape's eyes as he mourned Lily in Dumbledore's office. The desperate plea, hide them all then. Keep her safe. The visceral anguish of a broken man, not a calculating puppet master. It hit him with the force of a bludger. Valak wasn't showing him Snape's true motives, it was showing him Lysander's idealization of Snape. It was reflecting his own intellectual arrogance back at him, polished to a dangerous gleam. Valak had taken Snape's complexity, his agony, his impossible choices, and flattened them into a simplified narrative of pure, unfeeling genius, a narrative that suited Lysander's own ambition to be a master of logic, untouched by emotion. The illusory Armitage smiled, a chillingly perfect imitation. You see, Lysander? Emotional attachments are liabilities. They cloud judgment. They lead to ruin. No, Lysander whispered, his voice hoarse, a tremor running through him. He shook his head, the confusion and despair of the past weeks coalescing into a terrifying clarity. No, that's not Snape. That's what I wanted him to be. That's what you wanted me to believe. The illusion of Armitage's smile faltered, a flicker of something ancient and malevolent replacing the wise facade. The world around them, once a stable if desolate ruin, began to warp. Walls buckled, shadows stretched and retracted like grasping claws. Clever boy, Valak hissed, its voice no longer borrowing Armitage's tones, but settling into a grating, multi-layered echo that reverberated through his very bones. But what does it matter? You've already come this far. You've accepted the power. You've seen the truth as it should be. Why cling to discomfort? To weakness? Discomfort is truth sometimes, Lysander retorted, his breath catching. He was fighting, truly fighting for the first time, not against an external threat, but against the insidious lies Valak had planted in his own mind. His acclimacy, honed by weeks of delving into the Pensieve, now shifted from a shield to a tool of active discernment. He pushed back against the mental assault, not by blocking, but by analyzing, by feeling the difference between genuine memory and Valak's poisonous artifice. Valak's influence intensified. The ruins dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of distorted faces, Alara's, Professor Armitage's, even his own. They screamed accusations, whispered doubts. She betrayed you. He tried to stop you. You're a fool, Lysander. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to focus, to find the anchor. His thoughts raced back to Alara, her stubborn pragmatism, her unwavering presence even when he'd been cruelly dismissive. He remembered Armitage's quiet intensity, his repeated emphasis on looking inward, on seeking the emotional truth, not just the logical one. Their words, once dismissed as irrelevant to his superior intellect, now rang with profound wisdom. "They didn't betray me," Lysander declared, opening his eyes, his gaze steady despite the chaotic illusions. "I betrayed them. I pushed them away because you told me they were weak. You fed my arrogance." The vortex intensified, Valak screaming in his mind, trying to overwhelm him with a tsunami of self-loathing and fear. Lysander felt his resolve waver, the sheer psychic force threatening to crack his mental defenses. He saw Snape, dead on the floor of the shrieking shack, but Valak twisted it, showing him Snape's eyes staring at Lysander, accusing him of hubris, of failing to understand. Snape wasn't perfect, Lysander grit out, tears stinging his eyes as he fought to hold onto the real, painful memory. He made mistakes. He had flaws. He was human. And that makes his choices even more profound. He risked everything, not for glory, not for power, but for a love he'd lost. He sacrificed for others, for a cause greater than himself. That's not weakness, Valak. That's strength. True strength. A gasp escaped him as a wave of pure psychic agony crashed over him. Valak was enraged. The illusion solidified into grotesque, mocking figures of himself, pointing and laughing. He saw a vision of his greatest fear, standing alone, brilliance unrecognized, a pathetic failure. "You speak of strength, boy? You, who cower from the truth of your own ambition." Valak sneered, its presence growing denser, a tangible weight in the illusory space. "You seek to master the mind, yet you deny the very power that comes from embracing all that you are. I offered you clarity, purpose. I offered you control over your own narrative, over reality itself." Lysander fell to his knees, clutching his head, fighting against the suffocating mental pressure. He saw Alara, her hands reaching out to him, not in accusation, but in genuine concern. He saw Professor Armitage, his gaze piercing, asking him to see beyond the surface. He felt a surge of genuine shame, but beneath it, a burgeoning wellspring of empathy and humility. He had been so desperate to prove his intellect, to master mind magic, that he had become blind. He had let Valak twist Snape's legacy into a weapon against himself, against his friends. He had been so proud, so arrogant, that he couldn't see the simple truth, that true understanding came not from dissecting every fact, but from acknowledging the emotional complexities, the nuances, the self-sacrificing core that he had so readily dismissed as weakness. He took a deep, shuddering breath, using the last vestiges of his acclimacy to push back, not with force, but with acceptance. He stopped fighting the confusion, the pain, the shame. He embraced the messy, complicated truth of Snape's life and, by extension, his own. "You don't offer truth, Valak," Lysander said, his voice stronger now, resonating with a newfound conviction. He looked directly into the swirling chaos that was Valak's essence, no longer fearing it, but understanding it. "You offer a lie, tailored to my pride. A comfortable, powerful lie. But I choose the truth. The painful, messy, human truth." As he spoke, something shifted. The suffocating pressure eased. The distorted faces flickered, weakened. Lysander felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in weeks. His mind, once a labyrinth of paranoia, was now like a still, clear lake, reflecting the difficult but undeniable truth. He was no longer just an intellect. He was a wizard who understood the value of heart, of connection, of humility. Valak shrieked, a sound that threatened to tear the very fabric of the Pensieve. It couldn't feed on this. It couldn't corrupt a mind that chose genuine vulnerability over manufactured power. Lysander stood up, wobbling slightly, but resolute. He wasn't done. He had seen the true face of Valak's deception, and in doing so, he had glimpsed the true complexity of Snape's mind. But Valak was still here, a parasitic entity clinging to the deeper recesses of the Pensieve, still threatening to spread its rot. He had won a battle for his own mind, but the war for Snape's legacy, and perhaps for the very integrity of Hogwarts' hidden knowledge, was far from over. He needed to expel Valak entirely. And to do that, he needed more than just resolve. He needed to understand how Valak truly operated, How to sever its parasitic hold without destroying the precious, genuine memories that lay beneath its corruption. He needed a strategy, a final, direct confrontation. And for the first time, he didn't feel overconfident. He felt a quiet, determined humility. He had learned to trust his instincts. Now he would learn to wield them. The fight was coming, and he was finally ready. The flickering images of the Pensieve coalesced, no longer a chaotic whirlwind of despair, but a canvas for Valak's final, most insidious masterpiece. Lysander stood on the precipice of a nightmare made real, a distorted echo of the Hogwarts Great Hall, yet chillingly devoid of warmth. The enchanted ceiling mirrored a perpetually stormy night, black clouds churning, punctuated by lightning that cast grotesque shadows of invisible figures dancing around him. "You resist, Lysander," Valak's voice, a silken whisper woven from 1,000 nightmares, slithered into his mind. No longer an external presence, but an invasive thought. But for what? For a truth that will only bind you? For the fragmented legacy of a man who was himself a prisoner of his own making. Lysander clutched his wand, its familiar weight a meager comfort against the encroaching dread. He had spent the last agonizing hours sifting through the dregs of Valak's manipulations, revisiting fragmented memories he now saw with chilling clarity. The seeds of doubt against Alara, the perceived condescension from Professor Armitage, all carefully crafted illusions designed to isolate him, to feed the demon's hunger. He had seen the subtle shifts, the way a kind word from Alara had been twisted into patronizing pity, Armitage's warnings into veiled threats. The realization had been a cold, stark plunge into truth, stripping away his intellectual pride, leaving him raw and vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he had found an unexpected strength. "You wanted me to believe logic was everything," Lysander's voice, though shaking, resonated with a newfound conviction. "To seek only the true facts, to dissect Snape's life as if it were a potion formula. But truth isn't a formula. It's a tapestry of contradictions, of pain and sacrifice, of choices made in impossible circumstances." Valak chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. "And what truth have you found, boy? That your grand hero was a bitter, broken man? That your intellect, your pride, is a weakness, not a strength?" Suddenly, the hall dissolved, replaced by a dazzling vision. Lysander found himself standing before a monument of gleaming obsidian, inscribed with his own name. Figures with blurred faces, yet radiating adoration, bowed before him. He saw himself, older, distinguished, effortlessly casting spells of unimaginable power, his mind a crystalline fortress of unassailable knowledge. In this vision, Snape's entire legacy lay exposed, every secret meticulously categorized, every ambiguity resolved by Lysander's superior intellect. He had not just understood Snape, he had surpassed him, elevated him, and in doing so, elevated himself to a pantheon of unmatched magical brilliance. "This is your destiny, Lysander," Valak purred, its voice thick with seductive power. "The path free of messy emotions, of inconvenient loyalties. The power to know all, to control all. Embrace it. Embrace the clarity that only absolute knowledge can bring. You can fix the past, perfect the future. All you need to do is take it." Lysander felt a profound yearning tugging at him, a familiar siren song to his deepest desires for recognition and understanding. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. To transcend, to be untouchable, to finally prove his intellectual superiority beyond any doubt. But then, a flicker of an image surfaced, Alara's worried eyes, the firm but patient voice of Professor Armitage warning him against the allure of forbidden knowledge. He remembered the dull ache in his chest, the isolation, the paranoia that Valak had engineered. That path, however glorious, was a lonely, terrifying one. He looked at the vision, truly looked at it. The faces were blurred because there was no true connection. The monument was cold, sterile, a testament to an achievement devoid of warmth or empathy. This was not mastery, it was a gilded cage. "No," Lysander whispered, then louder, "no. This isn't power, Valak. It's emptiness. It's control, but not understanding. It's a world where nothing is complex, nothing is earned, nothing is felt. Valak's pleasant facade began to crack. The air grew heavy, the visions twisted. The adoring figures morphed into leering gargoyles, their praise turning to derisive cackles. The obsidian monument cracked, revealing a hollow core, filled with dust and shadow. You reject true potential for sentimentality? Valak's voice was laced with genuine fury now. You choose weakness? Humanity, in all its pathetic fragility. Yes, Lysander cried, finding his voice, finding his center. Yes, I choose it. Because it's not weakness. It's what makes us real. Snape wasn't perfect, Valak. He was flawed, he was bitter, he made terrible choices. But he also loved, and he sacrificed. He was a hero in a way you can never understand, because you only see the broken pieces, never the mosaic they create. As Lysander spoke, his mental defenses, refined by weeks of battling Valak's illusions, clicked into place with renewed vigor. This wasn't a clemency to block, but legitimacy to understand, combined with the profound empathy that Valak clearly abhorred. He wasn't just shielding his mind. He was actively projecting his new understanding, his acceptance of nuance, his embrace of emotional truth. Valak shrieked, a sound that ripped through the fabric of the Pensieve, vibrating through Lysander's very bones. The air turned frigid, then searing hot. The entity, no longer content with mere illusions, began to manifest its true form, or as close as it could get. Tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground, swirling into a gargantuan, vaguely humanoid shape, its face a swirling vortex of eyes and mouths, each whispering doubts, fears, and promises of power. It loomed over Lysander, radiating pure, concentrated despair, feeding on the echo of every bad decision, every moment of weakness Lysander had ever experienced. You are nothing without your certainty. Valak boomed, its voice now a cacophony of shrieks and roars. Your intellect is a fragile thing, a house of cards. I will tear it down, piece by painful piece. Lysander stood firm, his wand arm trembling, but his gaze unwavering. He closed his eyes for a split second, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He remembered Professor Armitage's words, true strength lies not in knowing all, Lysander, but in accepting that you never will. It lies in the humility to acknowledge the limits of the mind and the courage to trust the heart. He opened his eyes. He didn't fight Valak with spells, he fought it with understanding. He reached out with his mind, not to attack, but to perceive. He saw Valak not as an ultimate evil, but as a parasitic hunger, an entity that fed on the very arrogance and desire for control that he himself had once embodied. It was a reflection of his own darkest tendencies magnified. You feed on despair and doubt, Lysander stated, his voice now calm, steady. But I choose to accept. I accept that I don't know everything. I accept that Snape was complex. I accept my own flaws. And in accepting them, I deny your fuel. As Lysander articulated his acceptance, a strange light began to emanate from within him, a soft, warm glow that pushed back against Valak's oppressive shadows. It wasn't a magical light. It was the light of self-awareness, of humility, of empathy. Valak roared, a sound of pure agony. The shadowy form began to writhe, retracting, tearing at itself as if Lysander's newfound clarity was corrosive to its very essence. The myriad eyes shrieked in unison, the mouth snashed. You cannot defeat me. I am ancient. I am. You are a reflection of what I no longer choose to be, Lysander finished, his voice resonant with conviction. He extended his hand, not in a combative gesture, but in a gesture of release, of letting go. I am done trying to control the uncontrollable, to understand the ununderstandable. I accept the mystery. I accept the gray. I accept the humanity. With those words, Valak's monstrous form convulsed one last time, shrinking rapidly, its screams fading into a defeated, drawn-out whisper. The tendrils snapped back into the floor, the vortex of eyes and mouths collapsed inward, and then, with a final, almost imperceptible pop, it was gone. The oppressive darkness lifted, leaving behind a profound silence. The great hall, no longer a nightmare, shimmered, then dissolved into a single, crystalline memory droplet. Lysander reached for it instinctively. It was a fragment he hadn't seen before, a quiet moment. Snape, alone in his potions lab late at night, not brewing a dark potion or plotting, but simply looking at a wilting lily, his expression unreadable, tinged with a deep, private sorrow. There was no grand revelation, no hidden truth to be uncovered. Just a man, burdened and alone, holding onto a fragile memory. Lysander understood. Snape's legacy wasn't a puzzle to be solved, but a life to be acknowledged in all its messy complexity. He had sought mastery of mind magic, and in a way, he had found it, not by controlling others, but by mastering himself. The memory droplet pulsed, then evaporated. The world around Lysander spun, the familiar disorientation of exiting the Pensieve rushing over him. He felt a dizzying lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from his mind, from his very soul. He stumbled out of the Pensieve, gasping, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His knees buckled, and he would have collapsed if not for two strong arms that caught him. "Lysander, are you all right?" Ilara's voice was filled with frantic worry, her face pale. Behind her, Professor Armitage stood, his ancient eyes piercing, assessing. Lysander looked at Ilara, truly saw her. Her loyalty, her common sense, her unwavering support, all the things he had dismissed in his arrogance. He looked at Professor Armitage, whose cryptic warnings had finally clicked into place. He saw them not as obstacles or mere intellectual peers, but as allies, as friends, as anchors in a storm. I think so, Lysander managed, his voice hoarse. He gripped Ilara's arm, not out of suspicion, but out of genuine relief and gratitude. "It's over. Valak, it's gone." Professor Armitage stepped forward, placing a hand on Lysander's shoulder. "Gone, perhaps. Banished from your mind, certainly. But its essence, the seeds it plants, they linger, Lysander. You have learned a profound lesson, my boy. But the world holds many more shadows, and not all are so easily dispelled." He paused, his gaze fixed on the now still and silent Pensieve. "You have wrestled with a demon, and in doing so, you have opened your mind to new possibilities. But tell me, Lysander, now that you've seen the depths of memory and the resilience of the human spirit, what will you do with this newfound insight, this newfound power?" Lysander looked from the professor to Ilara, then back to the Pensieve, now shimmering with a gentle, almost inviting glow, as if waiting for another mind to explore its depths. He had found humility, but the hunger for understanding still flickered within him, tempered now by wisdom. The world and the mind were far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. His journey had just begun.